case of Pam Hupp. Pam Hupp was born on October 20th, 1958, in Delwood, Missouri, as the second child of the Newman family. She married Mark Hupp, and they had 2 children together. In February 2001, the family moved to Fallon, Missouri. Pam had a varied work history, including a job as a life administrator at State Farm until 2010, when she stopped working due to disability claims related to leg and back pain. Despite some past legal issues, including 2 charges of forgery, Pam's acquaintances would never have suspected her of being capable of murder. However, on August 16, 2016, Pam shot and killed Louis Gumpenberger, a mentally challenged man who had been struggling with physical and mental disabilities since a 2005 car accident. Pam claimed that Louis had attacked her with a knife after jumping out of a passing vehicle and that she had defended herself by slapping the knife away and then shooting him 5 times with her Ruger LCR, which she retrieved from her nightstand. However, this account of events seems suspicious, and it is uncertain what really happened that day. Pam accused Louis of instructing her to drive him to the bank to withdraw money belonging to Russ Faria, a man wrongly convicted of murdering his wife Betsy in 2011. According to Pam, Louis became agitated and excited, saying, "We're going to the bank. We're getting Russ's money." However, evidence later revealed that Louis's true intention was to have Louis Gumpenberger attack and kill Pam. A handwritten note found at the crime scene contained instructions for Gumpenberger. First, he was to obtain Russ's money from Pam's apartment. Next, he was to kill Pam and make it look like Russ's wife was responsible. The note included gruesome details, such as ensuring the knife was left sticking out of Pam's neck. The perpetrator was willing to pay Gumpenberger a large sum of money for carrying out this heinous act. Pam Hupp was arrested for the murder of Lou Gumpenberger. However, a question arose. Was Gumpenberger a hired assassin, or did Pam manipulate him using a mentally disabled man as a scapegoat? The truth began to unravel when Pam went to the O'Fallon Police Department voluntarily. During her interview, Pam asked if it would be recorded, mentioning that she normally appeared with Chris Hayes, a KTVI news reporter. She even blamed Hayes for attracting criminals through his reporting. Pam had a history of pretending to be Kathy, a producer of an NBC TV show. According to the O'Fallon police chief and the St. Charles County prosecutor, Pam used this persona to lure Gumpenberger into her home, where she tricked him into recreating a 911 call, providing a cover for the brutal crime she was about to commit. After killing Gumpenberger, Pam Hupp planted evidence to incriminate herself, including writing a note found on his body. The police had a strong case against her due to the overwhelming evidence they uncovered. They found 9 $100 bills on Gumpenberger's body, which Pam had placed there. The 10th $100 bill was later discovered in her dresser, and its serial number matched 3 of the $100 bills also found on Gumpenberger. Pam Hupp was arrested on August 23, 2016 and charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. When she requested to use the restroom on the day of her arrest, she attempted to commit suicide by stabbing her wrist and neck with a ballpoint pen. Fortunately, she did not succeed. On January 30, 2017, Pam appeared in court for the first time. The prosecutor, Phil Groen, argued that her actions demonstrated a consciousness of guilt. A grand jury convicted her of all charges. In December 2016, her bail was set at $2 million. Pam's trial began in 2017, during which she pleaded not guilty, prompting the prosecutor to pursue the death penalty. The prosecutor's reasoning was that Pam had seemingly chosen her victim, Gumpenberger, at random. In June 2019, Pam entered an Alford plea, which allowed her to plead guilty while maintaining her innocence. This move nullified the death penalty charge and led to a jury trial being canceled. As a result, Pam was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole in August 2019. Following her sentencing, she called her then-husband Mark Hupp and explained that she had confessed to killing Louis Gumpenberger to avoid putting their family through a lengthy and distressing trial. During the trial, disturbing facts about Pam's past came to light, shocking the police, judges, and the public. In June 2016, Judge Cunningham ruled that evidence related to the brutal murder of Betsy Faria could be presented in court. This ruling led to the reopening of the Betsy Faria case. Betsy, born Elizabeth Faria, worked with Pam at State Farm as a life insurance administrator and lived in Troy, Missouri, with her husband Russ Faria and 2 daughters from a previous marriage. Betsy was diagnosed with cancer in 2010. In October 2011, she discovered that the cancer had spread to her liver, and she only had a few months left to live. Sadly, she passed away on December 22, 2011. Before her death, Betsy changed the beneficiary of her $150,000 life insurance policy from her husband to Pam Hupp, without informing her husband or daughters. Pam claimed that Betsy had instructed her to set up a trust fund for her daughters, but later alleged that Betsy wanted her to keep the money because they had a romantic relationship. Betsy's daughters took Pam to court in 2014, trying to reclaim their mother's life insurance fund. However, their case was dismissed in 2016. In the same year, Russ, Betsy's husband, sued State Farm. On December 27, 2011, just 5 days after making Pam the beneficiary of her life insurance policy, Betsy attended a chemotherapy session at the Alvin J. Sitman Cancer Center. Weakened from the treatment, she went to her mother's house, where it was agreed that Russ would pick her up or she would stay overnight. However, Pam unexpectedly showed up and insisted on driving Betsy home, claiming to have dropped her off around 7 p.m. Betsy's daughter reported that her mother didn't answer her call at around 7:21 p.m. Later, at 9:40 p.m., Russ, Betsy's husband, desperately called 911 to report that his wife had taken her own life. However, Russ had been at his friend Michael Corbin's house, watching movies from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Afterward, he drove to Arby's Lake in St. Louis before returning home. When the emergency responders arrived, about 10 minutes after Russ's call, they quickly realized that Betsy's death was not a suicide. Her body was found lying on her right side, with 55 stab wounds and a deep cut on her wrist. A kitchen knife was lodged in her neck, and another knife was discovered under her pillow. Notably, there were no bloodstains or footprints around the entrance of the house. The investigation determined that Betsy died between 7:20 p.m. and 9:41 p.m. Suspicion immediately fell on Russ Faria, who became the prime suspect. The authorities believed he had a motive, as his wife had refused to give him access to $150,000. Russ was arrested and charged with his wife's murder, while the real killer remained at large. Russ Faria was arrested the day after Betsy's death. He became the prime suspect due to his 911 call, in which he claimed her death was a suicide. However, a glance at the body immediately ruled out this possibility. Additionally, a pair of blood-stained slippers were discovered in his closet, incriminating evidence against him. Russ was subsequently charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action in court in January 2012, just a day after his wife's funeral. The investigation revealed more damning evidence against Russ. He performed poorly on a polygraph test, leading police to regard his behavior as suspicious and erratic. Furthermore, at Pam's request, the police searched Betsy's laptop and found a disturbing Word document in which she expressed her fear of losing her life at the hands of her husband. Russ was held on a $250,000 bail, which he couldn't afford, so he was kept in county jail until his trial on November 18, 2013. During police questioning, Pam revealed that Russ had a history of violence, heavy drinking, and had previously threatened Betsy, making it easy to suspect him of the murder. The prosecution argued that Russ had a strong motive to kill his wife. She had received a large sum of $150,000 for her friend, bypassing him in the process. According to Judge Christina Menem, this motive was enough to implicate Russ. At the trial, Russ's lawyer, Joel Schwartz, defended his client's innocence. Schwartz claimed that Russ had spent most of the night with friends, who corroborated his alibi. Additionally, Russ had purchased food at a store that evening, which made it physically impossible for him to stab his wife 55 times within the given time frame. Furthermore, there were no bloodstains on his clothes or body. The prosecutor countered that Russ's friends might have been involved in the crime and had lied about his whereabouts that night. The prosecutor suggested that Russ's friends had accompanied him to buy food at Arby's and stage an alibi. The presiding judge, Christina Menem, refused to allow Joel Schwartz to present crucial evidence that implicated Pam as an alternative suspect. This evidence included phone records showing Pam was still near Betsy's apartment 30 minutes after she claimed to have left, as well as the fact that Betsy had made Pam the beneficiary of a $150,000 life insurance policy just 5 days before her death. Despite Pam having a clear motive, the judge chose to ignore it. In a closed hearing, Pam claimed to have put $100,000 of the insurance money into a trust fund for Betsy's daughters. However, in a later civil deposition, she admitted to keeping the money for herself, stating that she didn't want her daughters, mother, or sisters to have it. Meanwhile, Detective Mike Merkel of the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office reported that a crime scene camera had malfunctioned, resulting in important photographs being unable to be developed. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Russ was convicted of first-degree murder and armed criminal action in November 2013. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for 30 years. Before Faria's second trial, Attorney Schwartz finally obtained the photos that showed no blood trail. To this day, I've tried to identify who in the prosecutor's office sent me those photos, but I've been unsuccessful. Fox 2 News was present in the courtroom when Schwartz dramatically revealed that he had uncovered evidence that police and prosecutors had been hiding. After this, Russ was transferred to the Jefferson City Correctional Center, a welcome development for Pam's sister Betsy. During the trial, Russ's wife testified that he had once pressed a pillow against her face, whispering, "This is what it feels like to die," because she had removed him from her insurance policy. Schwartz pointed out that this story originally came from Pam, but the judge ignored this. Throughout the trial, Russ's friends were falsely accused of being accessories to murder, thanks to the prosecutor's closing speech. Fortunately, no charges were brought against them, even though Russ spent nearly 4 years in prison. In February 2015, attorney Joel Schwartz appealed Russ's conviction. However, back in 2013, Judge Christina Menem had already rejected Schwartz's request to review the case. In 2014, KTVI and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch revisited the case, uncovering some suspicious facts about Betsy's death and her true killer. Their investigation found that Pam Hupp had given contradictory statements to the police, including a false claim that she had left the Faria residence immediately after dropping Betsy off. The Faria murder case was marred by controversy and deceit. A police officer recalled being shocked that nobody suspected Pam, with everyone focusing on Russ instead. A 911 operator testified that Russ seemed genuinely shocked and agitated during their call. However, 2 jurors revealed that crucial information had been withheld from them, raising questions about why the sheriff's department would deliberately hide evidence that favored Russ. The media uncovered a disturbing web of relationships between the prosecuting attorney, ASI, and key figures in the case, including the captain of investigations and a lead investigator. This information led to Russ's retrial in February 2015. The Missouri Court of Appeal transferred the case back to the 45th Circuit Court, where a new judge, Stephen R., took over. He granted a new bench trial due to new evidence and released Russ on bond pending the trial. During the retrial, Russ was allowed to present incriminating evidence against Pam. Some police officers admitted that Pam had told them she saw Russ with another man in a car while she was dropping off Betsy. The CSI agent who handled the crime scene believed that Russ's bloodstained slippers were a setup and that the bloodstain was not from stepping in blood. Russ was acquitted of all charges and released on November 7, 2015. He later filed a lawsuit against ASI and 3 deputy sheriffs for ignoring exonerating evidence and fabricating evidence. In 2020, he was awarded a $2 million settlement. The case also led to repercussions for the officials involved. ASI faced a bar complaint, although it was rejected. She later announced that she was willing to cooperate with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Lincoln County Commissioner to review her conduct. Judge Christina Menem was suspended for misconduct in a different case and was voted out of office in 2019 for her role in the Faria murder case. In 2019, Lincoln County appointed a new attorney, Mike Wood, who reopened the Betsy Faria murder case. He confessed that the wrongful conviction of Russ had inspired him to take the job. Pam was eventually interrogated as a suspect in the murder and was charged with first-degree murder. The new prosecutor sought the death penalty due to the heinousness of the crime. Betsy Faria was brutally murdered, stabbed 55 times, and her wrist was almost completely severed. Detective Mike Wood condemned the act as animalistic and charged Pam Hupp with the crime. Wood had strong evidence against Pam, including a $150,000 life insurance policy that named her as the beneficiary just days before Betsy's death. Pam had promised to put the money in a trust fund for Betsy's daughters, but instead kept it for herself, claiming that Betsy had wanted her to have it. In an interview, Pam claimed that she and Betsy were lovers, but Wood believed she was lying. Pam had also loaned her son $120,000 from her company in 2021, contradicting her earlier claims. Wood was convinced that Pam murdered Betsy by stabbing her with a kitchen knife while she slept on the sofa. He believed Pam tried to make it look like a domestic violence incident by walking around the room with socks on. The evidence against Pam included a text message she sent to Betsy's phone at 7:20 p.m. claiming she was home, but her call records showed otherwise. The fact that Betsy was found lying on her side suggested to Wood that she was killed by someone she trusted. Pam pleaded not guilty to the crime, but her trial was delayed multiple times due to her attorney's death and other issues. Finally, in 2023, the trial was scheduled to start in 2025. Wood was not only determined to bring Pam to justice, but also criticized the Lincoln County prosecutors for mismanaging the case and showing bias against Russ Faria, Betsy's husband. He pointed out a 2015 destruction order that could have led to the destruction of evidence, which would have made it impossible for Russ to be released from prison. This case takes us to Croydon, London. Croydon is a large town in South London. It is one of the main commercial areas in Greater London, and it has a sizable shopping area. East Croydon serves as a vital center for the nation's rail transportation network. The town is also well known for its street art and creative murals that beautify public places. By the 20th century, Croydon was a significant industrial hub known for its metalworking, car manufacturing, and Croydon Airport. It is also known for the Whitgift Centre, the largest shopping centre in Greater London. In the year February 2005, Croydon was considered a safe community as residents would often stay out late at night. The town had a thriving nightlife. People were often seen at bars and clubs late at night. However, things changed when the news of Sally and Bowman's murder hit the community in shockwaves. Sally Ann Bowman was born in Charlton, South London, on September 11, 1987, to Paul and Linda Bowman, who eventually divorced. While growing up, Sally had quite a large family. She was the youngest of 4 children, with 3 older sisters named Nicole, Michelle, and Danielle. After their parents divorced, the girls continued to maintain a healthy relationship with them. Sally was a gracious young woman who was friendly, talented, and cheerful. Being responsible was a watchword for Sally Bowman. Since she became a teenager, she started thinking and acting like an actual adult. And in no time, she seemed to have had her life planned out. As a teenager, Sally already had a job and was living on her own in a rented apartment. She did not want to depend on her family financially, but she still got to see them on a regular basis. While growing up, Sally Bowman had always loved arts and performance. She was a born performer. She wouldn't love anything more than singing, dancing, and entertaining. She frequently performed karaoke at the neighborhood bar, singing delightfully, much to the enjoyment of her loved ones. Sally Ann was a complete package. She had the looks, the voice, and the acting talent, which could have propelled her to success. As a teenager, her love for arts and performance made her join the Croydon-based Brit School for Performing Arts, whose alumni included Amy Winehouse, Adele, Katie Melua, and Tom Holland. Sally Bowman was an aspiring model, and her decision to enroll in the Brit School for Performing Arts was a step further toward achieving her desired goals, one of which included becoming a professional model. Sally was a young woman who got her hands on different decent jobs that paid her bills and also promoted her career. After graduating high school in February 2004, she worked a part-time job as a hairstylist and a model. In the year February 2005, her previous modeling job seemed to have caught the attention of Pulse Model Management, a popular London-based model agency, which contacted her for a sign-up. Sally then began to participate in competitions. About a month later, she was already at the top of her game, achieving an impressive breakthrough. Sally Bowman, after winning a competition, was able to land herself the title the face of Swatch watches, a popular watch brand in London. She also got the opportunity to grace the floors of many prestigious fashion shows in London. At the age of 18, Sally pretty much already had her life figured out. She had built a career for herself and was very successful at what she did. Anyone who knew Sally would know that one of her biggest dreams was to one day appear on the cover of Vogue. She had been compared to supermodel Kate Moss. However, Sally would not live long enough to see what next step her newfound career would take her. On September 24, 2005, having worked tirelessly at the busy hair salon, Sally Bowman decided to spend her Saturday evening at her mother's house. She intended to relax and catch up with her mom before her elder sister, Nicole, came to pick her up for her friend's birthday party. Since she had turned 18 2 weeks ago, she was still in the mood to party in whatever form it came. At exactly 5 p.m., Nicole arrived to pick her up, and as she left her mom's house, she waved goodbye and said a final, "I love you, Mom." That same night, Sally's ex-boyfriend, Louis Proston, and his friends were also out partying at a club in Kingston. Sally and her ex-boyfriend, Louis, had a shaky relationship. They had trouble trusting each other. Sally would often think Louis was likely hanging around with other girls, and Louis, on the other hand, was confident that anytime Sally was out, she was probably flirting with other boys. That Saturday night, they had argued on their phones through texting, calling, and getting each other worked up. Their relationship was a standard teen romance. Amidst all this, Sally still managed to have a great time at the party. Around 10 p.m. at the Lloyd's bar, Sally could be seen with her sister and other friends having fun, partying, dancing, and socializing. At about 1 a.m. the next day, Sally and her sister left the bar. Outside the bar, her sister, Nicole, got into a fight and was later arrested by the police. Sally, who had called a taxi, waited outside the bar for 15 minutes before her taxi eventually arrived to take her to a friend's house. Sally did not stay long at her friend's. She later contacted her ex-boyfriend, Louis Proston, who agreed to pick her up and drop her at her home. The two decided to meet up at Croydon Town Centre. Sally then took a taxi and met up with Louis at the proposed location. They had broken up 2 weeks prior and had been trying to sort things out, but it seemed difficult. When Louis eventually arrived around 2:20, they both got into the car and were immediately on their way to Sally's house. During the drive, the duo got into an argument, each of them accusing the other of infidelity, which was a major contribution to their recent breakup. Finally, at Sally's home, they spent 2 hours bickering in the car outside her flat at Blenheim Crescent, South Croydon, until 4:15, when Sally got out of the car to walk to her door. Around the same time, a couple of neighbors were awakened by a strange noise that quickly turned into screams. They rushed to their windows to see if they could find the source of the noise, but nothing strange could be seen happening outside. They only noticed the back of an unidentified man walking down the street about 5 minutes later. At around 6:30 a.m., one of the neighbors who came out of her house noticed something odd. Behind a construction container, she saw something that she initially thought was a mannequin leg, but on getting closer, she was met with a terrifying sight. Lying on the floor behind the container was the half-naked body of a dead woman, who happened to be Sally and Bowman. The crime scene was immediately secured by the police. Although they were unable to locate the murder weapon, forensics eventually discovered the DNA of an unidentified man on Sally's body. They also determined that she had been sexually assaulted and had sustained at least 7 stab wounds from a sharp object. 3 of the stab wounds were so savage that they passed right through her body. Also, the unidentified lunatic had left numerous bite marks on her cheek, neck, and chest. Her handbag, cardigan, underwear, and mobile phone were also stolen. The news of Sally's death completely devastated her family. That morning, when her mother heard a knock at the door, she assumed Sally was behind the door, but it turned out to be police officials who came to tell her that her daughter Sally had been murdered. A few hours later, Sally's family, who were told to go identify her at the mortuary, hoped and prayed that the news of her death was all a mistake and that Sally was actually still alive. They eventually came out of denial when they realized it was really Sally lying dead on the mortuary slab. Meanwhile, the police began their investigation into Sally's murder. As part of the first phase of the investigation, the detectives ran the DNA sample from Sally's body through the national databases for offenders, but that did not help in identifying the face of Sally's killer. Additionally, the absence of cameras at the crime scene made the investigation more challenging. Investigators were able to determine that Sally was murdered about 10 feet from her front door. The distance between where Lewis dropped her off and her apartment was also very short, which suggested that she was attacked almost immediately as she stepped out of the car. The police's initial suspect was Lewis, since Sally was killed shortly after getting out of his car, and he was the last person to have seen her alive. Additionally, the couple's past fights and arguments did not go unchecked by the investigators, who thought Lewis might have something to do with his ex-girlfriend's murder. Many times, the couple's fights even went as far as calling the police to settle their differences, but no charges were ever filed. Lewis was apprehended by the police the same day after they tracked him down. During interrogation, he admitted that until the investigators themselves informed him about Sally's murder, he was not even aware that she had passed away. He confessed to the police that they had had a heated argument earlier that morning, but he denied being a part of her murder. According to Lewis's account of what happened, he drove off as soon as Sally got out of his car. The detectives, however, were hesitant to believe his story because, at the time, the available evidence did not seem to be in his favor. After a sample of his DNA was taken, he was then detained for 4 days as the police awaited the outcomes of the DNA tests. Lewis was eventually freed after it was determined that his DNA did not match the DNA sample found on Sally's body. During the DNA analysis testing, the forensics also found another intriguing piece of information. The DNA sample on Sally's body matched a criminal case from 4 years ago. In the year February 2001, a woman was making a phone call at a phone booth located in the parking lot of a convenience store. All of a sudden, she was attacked by an unknown man. The man stripped her naked and sexually molested her. Immediately after he had achieved his aim, he ran off and left his DNA on the floor of the phone booth. The victim then immediately went to the police station to report her ordeal. A DNA sample of the unknown pervert was then taken, tested, and attached to the case, though the police never succeeded in finding the offender. This incident occurred about 2.5 kilometers away from the scene where Sally was murdered. The authorities later realized they were dealing with a serial pervert who had managed to stay on the loose for a very long time. The only concerns were how many women had been harmed by this psychopath and when he would strike again. He had to be apprehended by the police before he destroyed someone else's life. It was immediately evident that the police's fears were not in vain because an hour before Sally was killed, another woman had been attacked on a nearby street. While on her way home, she was on a phone call speaking to someone when suddenly a man came up to her, apologized, and then quickly struck her. The shocked victim screamed and, out of fright, dropped her phone. What happened next wasn't what the attacker was expecting. Luckily for the shaken woman, a taxi driver appeared on the road and scared her attacker away. He immediately took the victim's phone and ran off. One spooky fact worth mentioning in this scenario is that the person the victim was speaking to on the phone was still on the line and could hear everything that happened. The attacked woman continued to scream for help even after her attacker stole her phone and vanished from her line of sight. Her continuous screams implied that the attacker was quietly hidden nearby. Maybe he was hoping the cab driver would pass by so that he could attack the victim once again. Thankfully, the cab driver noticed the woman's uneasiness and pulled over. He then made the woman sit in his cab and drove her to the hospital. While at the hospital, she dialed the police number and reported what had happened to her. She was then asked to describe the offender. She described the attacker as a white male between the ages of 25 to 30, around 180 centimeters tall, with short dark hair. Based on her description, the police created a sketch, which was later released to the media. Unfortunately, a lot of British males around the area fit this description. Detectives consequently got hundreds of calls from local residents. They all agreed that the sketch reminded them of a man they knew or had seen somewhere else. Police investigated each of these calls, but they never found anything. When they realized they could not locate the lunatic depicted in the sketch, the investigators chose to take a different route. The only lead the police had was the DNA found on the victim's body. The cops were also certain that the offender resided nearby. This was evident because he had also attacked a woman at a phone booth on one of the surrounding streets. In order to capture this crazed offender, the investigators made the decision to collect DNA from the entire neighborhood. The occupants of every apartment and home were to be questioned by police officials and requested to voluntarily provide their DNA samples. Naturally, the police had no expectation that the offender would want to release his DNA, but it was enough to obtain a sample from his family members to help them find the offender. For instance, the individual might have lived with parents who were oblivious to his crimes and would voluntarily provide the police with his DNA sample. The police, however, visited more than 6,000 addresses over the course of the following 6 months, and many locals gave them their DNA samples. But the entire endeavor was fruitless, as neither the culprit nor his relatives could be found. Croydon residents were terrified the entire time, and police raids had simply made them more uneasy. They were all aware that a psychopath was roaming the streets. Women feared taking nighttime strolls. Parents wouldn't allow their kids to leave the house. Since they had no other information, the authorities were forced to refer back to the sketch. Both the victim from the phone booth and the woman who had been assaulted by the psychopath on the day that Sally was killed were contacted. They were asked to describe the perpetrator again, and the investigators adjusted the initial sketch based on their evidence. At a press conference, the police displayed the sketch and, for the first time, provided information about the crimes the man had committed that had previously been kept secret. This was done in the hope that Croydon residents would become aware of how dangerous it is for such a maniac to roam freely on their streets and take greater precautions. Sadly, none of these worked either. The revised sketch was overly generalized and did not significantly change from the initial one. The description also fit thousands of men who resided in the area. However, what happened next surprised everyone unexpectedly. The case had a breakthrough in June 2006. In Crawley, West Sussex, a man was watching an England World Cup game against Trinidad at a bar while sipping on his drink. Having had too much to drink, he started arguing with another football fan. Their argument quickly escalated into a street brawl. Unfortunately for him, as he pushed his opponent to the ground, a police officer walked by. The police officer then captured the attacker, and he was taken to the police station. While at the police station, Mark Dixie, the 35-year-old who started the fight, experienced a severe panic attack and burst into tears. This attitude surprised the police in Crawley. Given that he had only been detained for misconduct, the person he attacked didn't even file any charges against him. The police wondered why he felt so uneasy. At the time, he looked highly suspicious to the police, but they soon had to release him on bail, not knowing that the reason for his sudden outburst of emotion would soon be apparent. Prior to his release, the police took his DNA sample and captured his fingerprints, as it was the usual procedure for any form of criminal case. After 12 days, the detectives got unexpected news from the forensics department. They said the DNA sample discovered on Sally's body had finally been matched to the DNA sample the police had taken from Mark Dixie. Despite realizing they were dealing with a dangerous lunatic, when Mark Dixie was caught on the street initially, the cop had to let him go. This is because they were unable to keep him in custody any longer due to legal restrictions. Now that he had been confirmed as the maniac they had been looking for, the police had to rearrest him. Nearly a year after Sally Bowman's murder, on June 28, 2006, Mark Dixie was ultimately arrested while taking a cigarette break at work. The police discovered pictures of Sally and Bowman and videos of Mark Dixie committing despicable acts over them during a search warrant of his home. He was also discovered to be living a few blocks away from Sally's home. Mark Dixie was accused of a long list of grave offenses in court. After researching his background, investigators discovered that he had a fairly extensive criminal history. When he was 16 years old in 1986, he committed his first crime. At the time, he lived in Stockwell and was using the name Mark MacDonald. He reportedly held a knife to the throat of a woman and then robbed and inappropriately assaulted her. Because of his age, he received a prison term of only 6 months. As Mark Dixie moved from place to place, he changed his name, but his obsession with sex and violence never changed. Mark Dixie was retried for robbery and molestation every year after his first crime. In June 1988, a Jehovah's Witness, now in her 60s, visited Mark Dixie's then-girlfriend, Sandra Beckhouse. Sandra had just lost their first baby. Unfortunately, Sandra was not home, and Mark Dixie took advantage of the situation. He saw a chance for violence and sex. He then punched Sandra's friend in the face, breaking her jaw and damaging an eye, then indecently assaulted her. But she tricked him into believing he could have sex with her at her parents' house nearby, where she raised the alarm. Mark Dixie ran away but was later caught and sentenced to 6 months in prison after pleading guilty at the last minute. In the year 1990, he was also detained for attacking a police officer. Unfortunately, the legal system was always in his favor in all these cases. He was only given little time, after which he came out of detention to continue committing his crimes. Mark Dixie was said to have relocated with his then-girlfriend to Australia in 1993. While in Australia, he continued with his crimes. 5 years later, he broke into the home of a young woman, robbing her and abusing her. He was subsequently deported from the country in 1999 after being arrested and charged 3 times for assault. At the time, it was questioned why Australian authorities did not imprison Mark Dixie or at the very least put him on the list of sex offenders for his crimes. He only paid a fine before he was deported. Unfortunately, at the time, the authorities were not yet taking DNA samples from criminals. Mark Dixie's DNA was taken from the body of Sally Bowman, but there were no matches in the national databases. Before bringing the case to court, the police had a lot of work to do. They soon learned that the night Sally was killed, Mark Dixie had been celebrating his birthday with friends at the Windsor Castle Pub, a bar on Brighton Road, just a few hundred yards from Sally's house. While at the bar, he was seen arguing with his girlfriend on the phone before drowning in alcohol and illegal drugs for the rest of the evening. The whole time, he kept to himself and didn't interact much with people around him. Mark Dixie and 2 of his friends left the bar and went to a nearby residence at Avondale Road around 2:30 a.m. When they got to the apartment, he stayed on the couch and waited for his friends to fall asleep. He then locked them up in their rooms so that they wouldn't know he was out of the house. Mark Dixie later picked up a knife and left the house. After much investigation, it was later revealed that he was the one who attacked the lady who was rescued by a cab driver. Mark Dixie had left for another street that night out of concern that the lady he attacked might call the police. Sadly, the street he eventually entered in search of another prey was Sally Bowman's. He lurked in the dark, waiting in the corner until Lewis parked his car, and Sally stepped out. Lewis, Sally's ex-boyfriend, had once mentioned during the investigation that on the night of Sally's murder, he had captured the image of an unknown man through his car's rear mirror when he had parked for Sally to get off, but he did not think much of it. Mark Dixie had suddenly jumped on Sally Bowman as she walked towards her front door. He then attacked her with his knife, sexually assaulted her, and ran away. He was the one the neighbors claimed to have seen walking down the street that night. He had later returned to his flat to sleep after killing Sally Bowman. The trial for Mark Dixie started on February 5, 2008 at the Old Bailey. Rather than owning up to his wrongdoings, he fabricated a preposterous story. According to him, he was simply strolling through the streets when he noticed Sally Bowman sprawled on the ground. He said he took advantage of the situation to assault her and then fled. He claimed Sally had been killed by another person. Mark Dixie allegedly said he didn't know that Sally was even dead. During the trial, he was described as a freeloader who used people, and many acquaintances came forward to tell their stories. A woman from Australia whom Dixie had assaulted in 1998 also served as a witness during the trial. According to the woman, he had assaulted her and stabbed her 7 times. Luckily, she survived. After the trial, on February 22nd, the jury unanimously decided that Mark Dixie was responsible for killing Sally and Bowman. The court condemned him to life in prison with a minimum of 34 years in prison, notwithstanding his absurd past. After his conviction, Sally's mother, Linda Bowman, said, "We now know he was arrested at least 3 times in Australia, but he was deported without any warnings being issued by the authorities. They didn't do their job properly, and that's the reason my daughter's dead. Mark Dixie was often moved from one prison to another after his sentence, and this was because a cellmate often bullied him and attempted to kill him. Amidst all this, Mark Dixie continued to deny his role in Sally's killing. It wasn't until 2015, 10 years later, that he finally admitted to being the one responsible for Sally's death. His confession did not make his sentence worse, but the authorities were able to prove that he was responsible for other crimes. In the year 2017, it was discovered that a Dutch citizen had wrongly gone to prison for 12 years for allegedly committing a despicable offense against 3 women in Spain. However, when a proper investigation was carried out years later, it became clear that Mark Dixie was actually the one who had committed the crimes and not the Dutchman. Mark Dixie also voluntarily admitted to committing another crime when he was 16 years old. In a parking lot, Dixie reportedly assaulted a woman in her car. He afterwards stole from her, tied her to the car door, and set ablaze the front seats of her vehicle. She, however, was able to escape. Later that evening, Mark Dixie found her home phone number and contacted her. He went on to taunt the woman, who eventually fled her house and started living in the countryside since she was unable to cope with the trauma. Mark Dixie also went on to admit to depraved acts in February 2002. He had sexually assaulted a woman on a set of stairs and bludgeoned her with a knife sharpener, though she miraculously survived the attack. In total, he had 17 other convictions for criminal acts, and in 2017, Mark Dixie received a second life sentence because he was found guilty of abusing 2 women in Croydon in 1987 and February 2002. The year 2017 was also characterized by a negative incident. Sally Bowman's grave experienced continuous vandalism by unknown vandals. Her family had to face a second trauma as they were forced to exhume her remains. She was cremated, and her ashes were kept at home. After all this ordeal, Sally's mother became a fervent supporter of the need for having a national DNA database. According to her, if the government obtained DNA samples from every citizen of Great Britain, crimes would be solved in 24 hours as opposed to 9 months. The woman was also positive that Sally's ex-boyfriend, Lewis, would have been sentenced to life in prison for a murder he did not commit if the killer had not left his DNA at the crime scene. The lead investigator who worked on Sally Bowman's case, Detective Superintendent Stuart Cundy, agreed with the idea of a national database, but the government opposed the National DNA Database Plan. They believed that forcing DNA samples out of citizens would be against fundamental human rights. This subject is very debatable. On one hand, a database like this would significantly speed up the investigation of crimes. Also, some criminals might be scared off from committing such atrocities altogether, knowing that they could be caught very easily. However, not all criminals leave their DNA behind at the crime scene. On the other hand, disclosing or abusing data from such a database might seriously hurt law-abiding citizens. What do you think about the Sally Bowman case? Do you think Sally Bowman's mom is right about having a national DNA database? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. The case of Roxana Valdez. Roxana Valdez was born in 1957 in a small village in the province of Punta Arenas, Chile. Roxana married a man whose name is not publicly known, and they had a son together. However, the marriage was not successful, and they separated in February 2011. As a single mother, Roxana faced significant challenges in her small village, where job opportunities were limited. The community's main occupation was farming and selling produce, and the local schools focused on teaching agricultural skills. Roxana worked at the Don Gregorio boarding school, which trained students to become agricultural technicians. Her role was a night supervisor, responsible for ensuring the students' behavior and slept at night. She did not have a direct role in raising the children. Roxana's son attended the same boarding school, as she was unable to care for him during the day due to her work in the fields. At the boarding school where Roxana worked, Claudio Munoz Ramirez was the head of grounds maintenance. His nighttime work schedule led to him meeting Roxana. Despite their 14-year age difference, they discovered they had a lot to talk about. Roxana would often spend entire nights discussing school issues and her failed marriage with Claudio. They also shared commonalities in their personal lives. Claudio had 2 daughters he loved, but he felt disconnected from their mother and had considered divorce multiple times. However, he stayed in the marriage because of a promise he made to her late father. Over time, Claudio seemed to forget his promise and began spending more time with Roxana, away from his family. Eventually, he made a decisive move without explaining himself to his wife. He packed his belongings and left their home to be with Roxana, who happily welcomed him into her life. Their relationship moved forward quickly, but Roxana overlooked some important red flags. She welcomed a man she barely knew into her home, despite having children who needed her attention. As they had enjoyable conversations, Roxana failed to notice that Claudio had a temper and could be cruel. The first major incident occurred at the boarding school, where Claudio was in charge of cleanliness. During a scheduled cleanup day, some students refused to participate, which infuriated Claudio. He threatened to beat anyone who didn't help, despite having no teaching experience. Although it's unclear if he would have followed through on this threat, the students eventually started cleaning. Later, they collectively complained to the principal about Claudio's threats of physical violence. The principal, unhappy with Claudio, asked him to resign voluntarily. This was a significant setback, as the Don Gregorio boarding school was one of the few places in the area that offered stable and decent-paying jobs. After searching for work in fields and at fruit bases, Claudio realized it was a futile effort. He and Roxana decided to look for a better life elsewhere, but they left their son at the boarding school so he could continue his education. They didn't want to take any risks by bringing him along. To avoid relying on employers who had already let them down, Claudio and Roxana decided to start their own small business, a fruit kiosk. They moved to Molina, a commune a couple of hours from the Chilean capital, known for its vineyards and wine exports. Roxana and Claudio bought a kiosk near their new home, found suppliers for vegetables and fruits, and started their small family business. Claudio took care of purchasing and transporting products, while Roxana handled sales throughout the day. They couldn't afford to hire an employee, as it would add to their expenses, and they worried that someone else might not take care of the perishable goods properly. Claudio became visibly upset and angry when he discovered Roxana was pregnant with their first child. This was a moment that required serious thought, but Roxana, caught up in their new relationship and thriving business, agreed with Claudio's suggestion to give the baby to her relatives to raise after birth. However, Roxana suffered a miscarriage afterwards. Following this, Claudio's behavior changed significantly. He frequently yelled at Roxana and occasionally turned violent. Neighbors, tired of the constant noise, often called the Chilean police, the Carabineros, to intervene in their domestic disputes. One time, when the Carabineros responded to a call, they found Roxana in tears and partially undressed, fleeing the house with Claudio chasing after her. Roxana revealed to the officers that she was suffering from ongoing domestic abuse, which had caused her miscarriage. The incident left her needing psychological support. However, as time went by, they seemed to put their issues behind them and continued living together as if nothing had happened. After the incident, Claudio should have faced charges, but Roxana chose to forgive him and give him another chance. She made him promise that it wouldn't happen again. Although Claudio promised to change, his past behavior with his ex-wife suggested that his words might not be reliable. Sadly, the past repeated itself. Claudio stopped physically abusing Roxana, but he started going out to local bars at night, drinking heavily and spending a lot of their family's money on alcohol and encounters with women. Roxana put up with her husband's behavior, hoping that he would settle down once they had a child. In a way, she was correct. After Roxana gave birth to a healthy child in February 2013, Claudio changed his ways. He stopped going out and focused on their business, which was growing and needed more attention. They expanded their business by buying another kiosk and vehicle for transporting products. Roxana also invested in firearms for protection, as they lived and worked in areas that weren't very safe. The family's assets appeared to increase substantially, but this growth was only theoretical. In reality, Claudio resumed his previous habits, wasting money on alcohol and reverting to violent behavior towards Roxana. Roxana's account detailed how the abuse in their relationship escalated. At first, Claudio drank sporadically, but the frequency soon increased. When inebriated, he would return home, accuse Roxana of fictional affairs, and subject her to physical and sexual abuse. His actions seemed intentionally hurtful, even when Roxana was pregnant. This culminated in a miscarriage in August 2012, sending Roxana into a prolonged depression. On one occasion, following his typical routine, Claudio went to a local bar and didn't come back until the next morning. Roxana, accustomed to his behavior, still felt anxious about him. It was later discovered that Claudio had taken 5 million Chilean pesos, equivalent to around $6,000, which Roxana had obtained from selling her mother's house. He spent this money on alcohol and visits to brothels. Roxana was shocked and felt betrayed when she discovered that Claudio had taken the money meant for their shared business, which was hidden in their daughter's room. When Claudio came home late that evening, Roxana confronted him about the missing money. However, Claudio was uninterested in discussing the issue and instead hit Roxana, admitting that he had squandered all the money. This incident was the final straw for Roxana. Without saying a word, she went to their bedroom, retrieved a revolver that was meant for protection against local criminals, and shot Claudio in the chest. Claudio died instantly. Roxana was surprised by her own drastic action and attempted to stop the bleeding from the gunshot wound, but it was too late. The close-range shot from the .38 caliber revolver was fatal. In her testimony, Roxana expressed deep remorse and acknowledged the immorality of her actions. She confessed that when she retrieved the revolver, her intention was not to intimidate Claudio but to kill him. Roxana remembered the numerous times Claudio abused and assaulted her, and how she failed to report him to the authorities due to fear. She was afraid of being alone, especially after they had a child together. After shooting Claudio, Roxana's main concern was how it would affect their daughter if she were imprisoned and the child was sent to an institution. That night, Roxana decided to get rid of the body and report Claudio missing. She knew the police were aware of his frequent disappearances during drinking binges. As a delicate woman, disposing of the body was a daunting task. She decided to remove it piece by piece, using kitchen knives to cut the limbs and head. The process required 5 knives, as they kept becoming dull. Roxana then boiled the dismembered parts in large pots, all while playing with her young daughter, who was unaware of what her mother was doing and what had happened to her father. Roxana's calculated approach to disposing of the body while trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for her daughter shows the complexity and desperation of her situation. The day after cooking and cooling the body parts, Roxana packed them into separate plastic containers labeled by body part, hands, legs, head, and torso, and then placed each container into a garbage bag. She loaded the bags into her car and drove to St. Lucia to scatter them on a vacant lot. Before leaving, she cleaned her house thoroughly with bleach. However, upon arriving in St. Lucia, Roxana couldn't bring herself to dispose of the bags, despite finding a suitable location. Roxana was nervous during the drive, constantly feeling like she was being watched and fearing that the police would stop and search her car. This fear escalated into panic, prompting her to devise a backup plan involving her daughter, where she would pretend to rush her to the hospital if stopped by police. She even considered pinching her daughter to make her cry louder and make the situation more believable. Since Roxana couldn't discard the remains, she returned home and hid the bags in the garage. She then cleaned the interior of her car with bleach again and visited Claudio's relatives. She told the police that Claudio had stolen a large sum of money and hadn't been home for days, but they simply shrugged off her claims. Roxana visited her mother and brother, who were alarmed by her condition. She wasn't eating, had a glazed expression, and kept asking the same questions. The only question she answered clearly was about Claudio's absence, claiming he was delayed due to a flat tire while buying goods for their store. Overwhelmed by her thoughts and the hidden evidence, Roxana broke down and asked her brother for help. When he arrived, she revealed everything and showed him the containers. Her brother was shocked. Roxana wanted to unburden herself and share the traumatic experiences she had with Claudio, but she primarily needed her brother's help to dispose of the containers holding the body. However, Her brother refused, fearing he would be implicated as an accomplice and face police involvement. He urged Roxana to confess to the Chilean police, the Carabineros, and threatened to do it himself if she didn't. Disappointed but with no alternative, Roxana decided to cooperate. That night, she went to the 4th police station to make a significant statement. The officers, who knew her, initially assumed she was there to report her problematic husband. However, they were stunned by what she revealed. Roxana was arrested on the spot. News of her arrest spread quickly, drawing numerous journalists to the station. As the journalists waited, Roxana was eventually brought out, visibly distressed and in handcuffs. Before being escorted into a police car, she exclaimed, "I was afraid he would kill me one day." At first glance, the case seemed straightforward. Roxana had confessed, provided evidence, and surrendered voluntarily. Nevertheless, prosecutor Monica Bisos was skeptical of Roxana's easy confession and wanted a more thorough investigation. Prosecutor Bisos asked to extend Roxana's arrest to allow for further forensic examination. The goal was to determine if Claudio was still alive when his body was dismembered, which would have led to a longer sentence for Roxana. The judge agreed to a 60-day detention to continue the investigation. At the same time, Roxana's lawyer, Carolina Gutierrez, argued that Roxana committed the crime under extreme emotional distress. This could have been made worse by postpartum depression and the domestic abuse she suffered. Gutierrez highlighted Roxana's cooperation with the authorities and her voluntary confession as reasons for a more lenient sentence. However, forensic results later showed that Claudio died from a gunshot wound to the chest, disproving the prosecution's theory that he was alive during dismemberment. As a result, the factors that would have increased Roxana's sentence were dismissed. Another lawyer, Juan Pablo Cardenas, pointed out that the gun used in the murder was registered. He also noted that Roxana first reported domestic violence to the police just 20 days after they moved in together. Psychologist Rodrigo Valenzuela conducted a medical examination and presented documents to the court showing that Roxana was severely mentally unstable when the crime occurred. This instability, linked to the loss of 2 children, meant she wasn't fully aware of her actions. Additionally, forensic results revealed that Claudio had a high blood alcohol level at the time of his death on April 1735. Roxana's trial began after a year of investigations and evidence gathering. During the trial, Roxana refused to make statements due to her distress over the media portrayal. Prosecutors emphasized the severity of the crime, but couldn't prove premeditation. The defense argued that Roxana acted in self-defense against a man who had brutally mistreated her for years. The court hearing in Chile lasted several weeks, captivating the entire nation. Prosecutor Monica sought a 15-year prison term for Roxana, the accused. After considering the defense and the jury's input, the judges sentenced Roxana to 6 years in a correctional facility with a relatively lenient regime. Claudio's family, who had hoped for a life sentence or even the death penalty for Roxana, were outraged by the court's decision. They had already been upset when the prosecutor requested a 15-year sentence, which they felt was too lenient. The family attempted to downplay any history of domestic violence and claimed that Claudio, a financially independent businessman, would not have stolen $6,000 from Roxana. Additionally, they alleged that Claudio had confided in them about Roxana's threatening behavior, stating that she would often retrieve a revolver from the closet and threaten to kill him. In a press interview, Claudio's sister shifted the blame to the Chilean state, arguing that the country's judicial system is corrupt and fails to deliver justice, as evidenced by the relatively short sentence given to Roxana, which she compared to punishments for minor thefts. Giselle, Claudio's first wife, spoke out in his defense. She stated that Claudio was never violent during their many years together. In contrast, frequently started arguments due to her jealousy and possessiveness. Roxana was initially imprisoned, but after serving 2/3 of her sentence, she was transferred to a semi-open education center in Tala for good behavior. She was allowed to stay in contact with her daughter and was eventually released early. The media reignited public interest in the case, and many people were outraged by her early release. However, some individuals, despite viewing Roxana as a murderer, believed her actions were justified because they saw her as a victim. The debate surrounding this case continues to this day. This story emphasizes the severe consequences that can occur when domestic violence is not addressed promptly. This case takes us to Agawam, Massachusetts. Agawam, Massachusetts is a small town near the western Connecticut border. The city is most notable for the Six Flags amusement park. The park is the biggest mime park in New England. It has a wave pool, numerous water slides, and 8 roller coasters. Agawam additional attraction is the Robinson State Park, a day-use park with biking trails, fishing ponds, walking paths, kayaking, and cross-country skiing. Typical industries in the city of Agawam include construction, manufacturing, and retail. Residents in Agawam could not be more happy for its convenience. The majority of those who work for a living in the city commute for 25 minutes or less to their workplace. There are 3 elementary schools in Agawam, in which one of them include the Agawam High School, where there is a memorial to one of the town's most beloved teachers, Lisa Ziegert, whose untimely death changed the city of Agawam forever. Lisa Marie Ziegert was born on the March 24, 1968 in Holyoke, Massachusetts to George and Diane Ziegert. Lisa grew up in a loving, tight-knit family. She had 3 other siblings named Sharon, David, and Lynn. Lisa and her family were residents of Agawam. While growing up, Lisa had developed a passion for music, which made her learn several musical instruments. In fact, at some point in her life, she joined the school musical groups. After high school, Lisa Ziegert attended Westfield State University, where she studied education and ultimately obtained a teaching degree in the year 1990. She worked as an intern for some time, during which she worked several shifts as a counselor at a kids' camp. Lisa loved teaching. She took her profession seriously and was active at it in every way. She had also taught Sunday school at her church. After her internship was over, at the age of 24, Lisa accepted a position as a teacher's assistant at Agawam High School, where she had previously attended as a teenager. There, she worked primarily with a group of kids that had special needs. Lisa had a greater understanding of her students than any other instructor. She was also very professional and worked hard to ensure that every one of her students received the best education possible. Lisa was a very special person. With the kids, she always had a special rapport. They knew that she really liked them and that she treated them like people, Lisa's mom said. In the evenings, after the shift at school was over, Lisa also had a part-time job at the neighborhood Brittany cart and gift shop. One fateful Wednesday afternoon on September 15th, 1992 was typical for Lisa Ziegler. She had concluded her shift at the school. She left the school building around 4:30 p.m. and drove directly to the card and gift store, where she worked weekdays from 5 to 9 p.m. Her sister, Lynn, briefly dropped by around 5:30 p.m. to keep her company because Lisa would always complain to her family about how bored, lonely, and scared she feels while at the shop at night. According to Lynn, during her visit to the store, there was no sign of Lisa being in a bad mood. She said her sister was cheerful the whole time that evening, and nothing seemed off. It was easy talk. It was sister talk. It was a little after 6 p.m. when I left. And then I went home and she was fine. She was fine when I left, Lynn said. By the following morning at 8:45 a.m., Sophia Maynard arrived at the card and gift store as usual to open up the store. She was supposed to start working at 9 o'clock. She was shocked to see Lisa's car in the parking lot because she worked at the school in the mornings, so she was not supposed to be in the store when classes were on. Sophia noticed that a light was on inside the store and the doors open sign was visible. At that point, Sophia thought that Lisa might have missed the school morning shift because of the incoming Easter celebration. She and Lisa intended to stuff some balloons for sale during that holiday. When Sophia entered the store, she called Lisa's name multiple times, but she got no answer. I called her name a couple of times and I figured she'd just pop her head out. She didn't. I came behind the counter. All of her things were there, her drawings, her pocketbook, her car keys. And then I just kind of freaked out, Sophia said. Everything looked strange to Sophia. She felt something was not right. She immediately dashed out the store and ran across the street to a restaurant there and then asked them to call the police. As soon as the police got there, they started inspecting the store. The front of the building appeared to be normal, but the back had a creepy opening. Approaching the storeroom at the back, officers discovered numerous shattered bags that had blood stains on them. They also discovered a number of cards that were scattered across the floor and covered in blood as well. All these indicated a sign of struggle between Lisa Ziegert and her attacker. Additionally, they discovered some tiny dirt by the door that they believed might have been from a shoe trail. Despite all of these evidence, the investigators were unable to locate a useful lead within the store. That morning, Lisa unusually failed to show up at school. The principal called her mother to check if everything was okay with her, but Diane Ziegert had no idea where her daughter was. Her news of disappearance traveled the town of Agawam, and within hours, all of her friends, family, and acquaintances began to do all they can to bring Lisa back home. The police's initial strategy to the case was to develop a robbery theory, but that theory was quickly abandoned when they discovered that the perpetrator had not accessed Lisa's wallet or cash register. The goods in the store were also not missing. The second approach the detectives took in the case was to retrace the timeline of what happened the previous evening. They discovered that Lisa's sister had left the shop around 6 o'clock. They also spoke to store owners and neighbors around the card and gift store. It was discovered that Lisa had a conversation with the owner of the carpet shop next door at around 7:20 p.m. They both talked about a critical issue with their local parking lot, which was being used by patrons of the bowling alley. The shop owner then informed her that he would not take the chance of publicly criticizing the drivers who had parked in front of their stores. He claimed that many of them were crazy and dangerous. After about 15 minutes of conversation with Lisa, he left to go home. Police went through the cash register and discovered that the most recent time money had been deposited was 8:20 p.m. Investigators also located a woman who entered the store at about 9 p.m. She said the store's door was opened, but nobody came out to attend to her, so she left. Before taking her leave, she claimed to have heard noises coming from the back room. She said it was a banging noise, but she didn't think much of it and decided to leave. The police were able to determine the general time frame of Lisa's disappearance. She finished attending to her last customer at 8:20 p.m., and by 9 o'clock, something had happened to her. The detectives were then left with the questions of what had happened to Lisa Ziegert within those 40 minutes. On the day Lisa was discovered missing, the local police together with the FBI and the Massachusetts State Police carried out a massive search for her. The search party on foot explored the vicinity of the store while the helicopter searched farther off areas. Additionally, police dogs were brought to the store area in an effort to follow Lisa's track. Sadly, none of these produced any favorable outcomes. On April 17, 1992, the head of the local police department announced that the case had been reclassified from a missing person case to a kidnapping case. This was done because investigators were confident that Lisa had not left the store of her own free will. 2 days after she vanished, the police were already looking into a kidnapping case. On Easter Sunday, April 19th, all the nearby churches prayed for Lisa Ziegert to be found alive and unharmed. Even though it was Easter, there was no sense of celebration. Around 2 p.m. that same day, a call was made to the police. On the outskirts of the town, close to Route 75, a man was walking his dog. He spotted a woman's body while walking through the wooded area. He immediately alerted the police afterwards. When police arrived, they identified the woman to be Lisa Ziegert. They discovered numerous stab wounds on her neck and legs, which she had sustained from a sharp object. Medical professionals then came to the conclusion that Lisa had also been sexually assaulted. Investigators were able to determine that Lisa's body was dumped 5 kilometers away from the store, which indicated that the offender most likely drove her there in a vehicle. In order to protect any potential evidence, detectives promptly blocked off the area and moved in a single line. At the time, it was raining and the muddy road was covered in tire tracks. Sadly, the cops were unable to locate the murder weapon or any other concrete proof. The sad news that Lisa Ziegert had been brutally murdered by an unidentified killer immediately went around the city of Agawam. The church where she taught Sunday school on Sundays, in her honor, organized a farewell service. Around 1,000 people attended the service. People said good things about her. Lisa was loved, and the news of her premature demise made residents of the small community of Agawam, who were used to living in peace and safety, experience a mood that was almost panic. Many store owners canceled single shifts and employees escorted one another to their cars at night. Within a matter of days, the self-defense instructors had a lot of students coming in for classes. Also, roughly 300 women filed for a license to possess a gun. The entire community was terrified that an unidentified criminal would attack one of them again. Amidst all these, the FBI and the police were fervently working on the case non-stop. It soon became public knowledge that they had obtained a DNA sample from the crime scene. The DNA sample might have belonged to the murderer. The investigators at some point brought Lisa's boyfriend in for questioning since they suspected him. He, however, had an alibi and the DNA sample from the crime scene did not match his DNA. Additionally, DNA testing was done on Lisa's friends, co-workers, and relatives. And again, no matches were found. Numerous tips were sent to the police by locals. On the night of Lisa's murder, there were several reports of a strange car. Others claimed to know the offender's identity, but detectives weeded out all of these leads since they were dead ends. The police concluded that a van or large SUV had left the tire tracks on the road close to where the body was discovered. Despite not getting any closer to apprehending the offender after questioning all drivers of similar vehicles, detectives were able to track down a witness who might have seen a similar vehicle that night. At around 9:15 p.m. that night, a worker from a store close by was on her way home. She was at a traffic light when she noticed a sizable SUV pulling off the road and driving in the direction of the spot where Lisa's body would eventually be discovered. Since it was dark outside, the woman was unable to provide more specific details about the car. She merely mentioned that she thought the car included a man and a woman. She also mentioned the peculiar fact that the woman's head was oddly jerking, as if she were dozing off or unconscious when the car pulled into the gravel road. Unfortunately, the information did not help in identifying the suspect. Since then, all leads have been exhausted. Police kept working on the case, but as each month went by, the likelihood of cracking this mysterious case diminished. Before Lisa's family and friends were given another opportunity to learn the truth, an additional year and a half had gone. National television aired an episode about the case in October 1993. The well-liked program featured unresolved case stories that received a ton of attention. This occasionally brought fresh witnesses to the police attention, giving the case new life. Lisa's case was not different. The police received 700 calls from callers with some kind of information within an hour of the broadcast. Most of these leads, as usual, went nowhere, though all of them were looked into by the police. The cops claimed to have found a few worthwhile leads, but they did not say which one. Sadly, it also had little effect. The livelihood of cracking the case significantly decreased with time. The family of Lisa went to tremendous lengths to make sure her legacy was preserved and not forgotten. Despite the early end to Lisa's teaching career, her family had a significant impact on the Agawam's educational system. 3 years after Lisa's murder, in 1995, her parents donated $11,000 specifically to the school's science department where Lisa worked. These donations were used to support genetics classes and to purchase equipments. Additionally, her parents established a fund for special needs students, which gave them around $35,000 in scholarships. 2002 made it 10 years since Lisa was killed. Still, her mother, Dee Ziegert, held out hope that the case will eventually be solved. She made considerable efforts to preserve her daughter's memories. She partook in every interview and responded to every questions from the media. Each year, she assembled a sizable crowd to light candles in Lisa's memory. In the same period, investigators were fervently working on Lisa Ziegert's case. They only possessed one key piece of evidence at the time, a DNA sample from the alleged murderer. They continued to cross-check the DNA sample against databases of known criminals in the hopes that the actual suspect would eventually show up. But months turned into years, and the killer would not be found. 24 years after Lisa was savagely murdered, on September 24, 36, investigators made the decision to take a different approach to the case. They then opted for DNA phenotyping. The basic idea behind it is that specialists can determine a person's supposed portrait and physical characteristics from the data contained in their DNA. For example, with the use of DNA, experts can determine a person's gender, their approximate age, eye color, and hair color. Although the portrait created using this data may not always be correct, but occasionally, the coincidence of the portrait matching the face of the real suspect is remarkable. Based on the DNA sample of Lisa's murderer, investigators were able to produce two portraits of the culprit, one at age 25 and the other at age 50. After the photos were released to the public, more than 170 calls were made to the police department. People who made these calls claimed to have seen a similar man. However, the majority of these leads were fruitless. On the September 18, 2017, just a year later, police made an unexpected prominent announcement. The offender had been taken into custody. He was identified as Gary Ciara, a 49-year-old man. The news of his arrest immediately spread like wildfire throughout the media. Rarely do the police catch the murderer 25 years after the crime was committed. As a result, such stories immediately garner a lot of public interest. The moment Gary Ciara was taken into custody, the detectives made public how they had located him. It was discovered that Gary was listed as a suspect in 1993, the year after Lisa was killed. Do you remember that federal television program that resulted in thousands of phone calls with leads for the police? Well, it happened that a Seattle lawyer was one of those callers. At the time, he informed the police that his client might know something about Lisa's death. His client was a woman who was divorcing her spouse at the time. They were residents of Long Meadow, a community close to Agawam. The woman claimed that her husband was displaying more attention to Lisa Ziegert's case at the time. She claimed any time Lisa Ziegert's murder case was being broadcasted on television, her husband would storm into the room and vacantly stare at the television screen, completely oblivious to everyone around him. Her husband, as you may have guessed, was Gary Ciara. At the time of Lisa's murder, he was 24 years old and was married with a 1-year-old son. Gary Ciara and his wife were always arguing and getting into fights, and soon after the birth of their son, they had already started their divorce process. In 1993, according to the police statement, investigators had already developed the notion that Gary was involved in Lisa's murder, but they couldn't find any proof to back it up. Also, his ex-wife, who provided the information, made the police doubt her testimony. And this is because she had a long history of alcohol abuse in addition to a long list of mental illnesses. Additionally, Gary was granted legal custody of their son after the divorce, but his wife secretly transferred the boy to a different state. It's also crucial to note that this wasn't the first time some wives contacted the police to report that their husbands might have been responsible for Lisa Ziegert's death. There were a lot of calls like that, and the police assumed Gary Ciara's case was one of them. Despite all these, at a point, Gary was questioned in an interview, but he claimed not to be involved in Lisa's murder and declined to provide a sample of his DNA. The cops effectively had no other choice since no one could lawfully force him to provide his DNA sample. Detectives later gathered the list of all the males who'd been questioned about the crime, but had declined to provide their DNA sample. Gary Ciara made it to the list of suspect, and he was repeatedly requested to be brought in for interrogation at the police station. In February 2008, during his third interview, Gary Ciara tried hard not to touch anything in the room, not even the table in front of him. A bottle of water was provided for him, but he wouldn't touch it. He gave off the impression that his only thought was how to prevent the police from getting a sample of his DNA. In 2017, investigators compiled a list of 11 suspects, including Gary Ciara. Each of them had declined to willingly provide a DNA sample after being interviewed at various points throughout the investigation. In reality, there were a lot more suspects on that list, but due to DNA phenotyping, detectives were able to exclude the wrong men. These men didn't fit some of the traits that experts got from the DNA sample of Lisa's killer. In August of 2017, having been refused many times by the suspects on the list to provide their DNA, investigators had no other choice but to compile all available evidence and go to court. They asked the court for an order requiring all the 11 members on the compiled list of suspects to submit their DNA samples, to which the court granted their request. The cops visited Gary's apartment on Lathrop Street at Westfield Spring on September 13th, 2017, to inform him of this order. But Gary wasn't at home. His roommate with whom they shared the apartment answered the door. The cops gave him their contact address. They also requested that he promptly pass the information to Gary Shera. The following day, an unexpected event took place. Gary Shera's then-girlfriend called the cops and told them that Gary had left 3 letters in her house. To the investigators' surprise, when they opened the letters, Gary Shera had written in details his confession, a last will and testament, and a brief letter of apology to the Ziegert family. I've never really been or even felt normal. From a very young age, I was fascinated by abduction and bondage. I could never keep it too far from my mind for long. On that fateful day, I let myself do something terrible, Gary Shera wrote. He stated that although he had no intention of killing Lisa, things had apparently spun out of his hands. Gary claimed that he had numerous opportunities to turn himself into the police, but he could not because he was a coward. He claimed that he had endured years of self-hatred. When concluding the letter, he made his intention to end his life known. The cops immediately began looking for Gary Shera, and soon, his car was found in the parking lot of a hospital in Stafford Springs. Another suicide note was placed on the windshield. It was soon discovered that Gary had taken some harmful drugs to kill himself, but he immediately got into his car and drove to the closest hospital, where the drugs were flushed out of his body system. After the doctors were done tending to him, Gary Shera was arrested and taken into custody. A search warrant for both his apartment and that of his girlfriend's was simultaneously issued by a judge. The police discovered numerous items that contained his DNA there. When these items were tested for a DNA sample, it was not surprising that Gary Shera was Lisa Ziegert's killer because the DNA found on the items in his home 100% matched the DNA sample found on Lisa Ziegert's body. Aside from this, investigators also had several other potentially important leads. Joyce McDonald Shera, Gary's wife, who had first raised concerns about him in 1993, had sadly passed away in 2014, but investigators were able to locate documents written by her attorney in which the woman provided very disturbing details. One day, Gary had told her bluntly that he wouldn't be able to get intimate with her unless he was holding a knife. The woman called her sister the day after Lisa was killed and revealed that Gary had returned home late that night. She mentioned that his body was covered in scratches and he seemed very disturbed. Additionally, Gary gave his wife a music box and claimed to have purchased it from the same gift and card store where Lisa worked. But according to Gary, it was an older woman who actually sold it to him. The issue is that there had never before been such an employee at the store. It is unclear why the police was not informed about all of these details in 1993. And it is impossible to find out now because the woman who had the information has died. Gary Shera kept declaring his innocence while in custody and refused to admit to his wrongdoings. He most likely acted out of pure fear, but with that much evidence against him, there was no way out for him to get away with his crimes. He only succeeded in delaying his sentence, and that was all. The trial wasn't scheduled to start for another 2 years, but Gary, who had been imprisoned the entire time, decided to confess to his crime. According to Massachusetts law, a defendant facing a first-degree murder charge faces life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lisa Ziegert's family and friends were in the courtroom. Her mother, Dee Ziegert, who had hoped for a quarter-century to discover the mystery behind her daughter's murder, spoke. She thanked everyone who had been involved in the investigation, as well as the regular caring citizens who had helped and supported her family for so long. Today, Lisa got the justice she deserved. Emotional closure will never be achieved. Every family function will always be one short. Every get-together with friends will be one short, said George Ziegert, Lisa's father. Gary Shera was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison as a result of his crimes. Finally, one of the longest-running criminal cases in the state of Massachusetts was eventually resolved and officially closed. The case of Patrick de la Cerda. In February 2018, the quiet town of Deltona, situated in eastern Florida near the Atlantic coast, faced a shocking incident: the brutal murder of a young man named Patrick Diarra. The 25-year-old man was found dead his home. The of his injuries suggested a deeply personal motive behind the attack. The Patrick Darragh case is emblematic of a meticulously planned crime that nearly went unsolved. Although the suspect was identified almost immediately, no direct evidence was available to confirm his guilt. Patrick Darragh was born in June 1992 in Miami, Florida, a picturesque metropolitan area. Patrick grew up under the care of his father, Max Darragh, originally from Spain, and his mother, Patricia Ronza, born in France but relocated to the United States in the 80s. They married soon after and started their family. The Darragh family was known for being close-knit and happy. Patrick grew up surrounded by love, care, and mutual respect. A kind, intelligent, and sociable young man, he did well academically and could easily become the center of any social gathering. From childhood, he had a strong bond with his parents, who spared no effort or expense to ensure he received a good education and developed into an upstanding individual. Max Darragh worked in construction and was highly regarded in his field. Although not wealthy by big city standards, the family lived comfortably. After graduating high school, Patrick chose to study construction in university, aiming to follow in his father's footsteps. While Patrick attended university, his parents decided to divorce after nearly 25 years together. Remarkably, they separated amicably without any scandals or disputes over property. His mother moved to Deltona, a quiet town on Florida's East Coast, where she soon remarried. Despite their separation, all family members remained close and maintained friendly relations. Patrick stayed with his father in Miami. They worked together and were respected professionals within the construction industry despite their personal circumstances. They kept in regular contact, frequently calling and communicating. They were always ready to assist when necessary. Patrick often his mother in Deltona, sharing updates about his life, his joys, and experiences. He delighted in telling her about meeting the girl of his dreams. Thanks to his French-Spanish heritage, Patrick had an eye-catching appearance from a young age. He was quite popular with the opposite sex, but he valued the example set by his family. Consequently, Patrick did not pursue frivolous relationships. He yearned for a meaningful connection and a strong family of his own. Patrick created an account there based on a friend's recommendation and wasn't entirely convinced it would help him find his soulmate. One evening in June 2017, while browsing through profiles without much optimism, a photo caught his eye. A captivating brunette with mesmerizing eyes and an enchanting smile. Intrigued, Patrick decided to message her. The lady in the photo was Jessica Devaney, born in 1988 in Orlando, Florida. After high school, she attended a local university, where she studied banking before securing a job at a bank branch in her hometown. Jessica was immediately drawn to Patrick's profile as well. They exchanged messages on the website for several days before deciding to swap phone numbers. Over the next few weeks, they spoke every evening for hours, discussing various topics and forming a deep mutual sympathy and trust. Realizing their connection was genuine, they decided to meet in person, despite living in different parts of the state. They chose a location that was roughly halfway between them for their first date. On their first date, Patrick realized that Jessica was the girl he'd been searching for all along and whom he no longer wanted to let go. She also liked him immediately, though Jessica was slightly confused by the age difference, as she was 4 years older than Patrick. On his way home, Patrick called his mother to share that he had met the girl of his dreams whom he wished to marry and start a family with. Patricia heard the joy and excitement in her son's voice, recognized his seriousness, and felt happy for him. Their long-distance relationship lasted several months, presenting challenges because the couple could only see each other on weekends. They usually met somewhere neutral, renting a hotel room in a cozy, secluded place to enjoy each other's company. However, by Sunday night, they parted ways since they needed to return to work on Monday morning. In December 2017, Patrick moved to Delton, where his mother lived, to be closer to Jessica. He bought a house in a quiet neighborhood and began renovations to create a cozy nest for Jessica's eventual move. But Jessica couldn't leave her job immediately. Thus, they planned a housewarming party for early spring the next year. On New Year's Eve, which the couple celebrated together, Patrick prepared a surprise for Jessica. He arranged fireworks in the backyard of the house, and as she admired them, he got down on one knee and held out a box with a ring. He then asked her the most important question, whether she would become his lawful wife. Jessica felt incredibly happy and, of course, agreed. Patrick later admitted he'd spent considerable time searching for an engagement ring, but hadn't found one perfect enough in any jewelry store. To make sure he could propose before the new year, he chose the best available option, but ordered an exclusive ring from a jewelry workshop. An original piece designed by himself. 2 months had passed since the engagement. Preparations for both the wedding and the upcoming housewarming were in full swing. The couple's choice of events had received their parents' approval, and they themselves were unspeakably happy, readying for a new stage in their lives. The young couple planned an extravagant celebration, either on the shores of the Atlantic Ocean in Miami or in France, where the groom's mother originated from. On February 27, 2018, Max Diarra, Patrick's father, received a call from a courier. Max's number was listed as an additional contact. The courier reported that Patrick's order had been delivered to the specified address. However, no one opened the door or answered the phone. This was highly unusual for Patrick, prompting concern from his father. As he was occupied at work and couldn't leave to pick up the order or check on his son, Max decided to contact Jessica, his future daughter-in-law. Max called Jessica with anxiety in his voice, expressing that he couldn't reach Patrick. Jessica herself had been trying to get in touch with her fiancé since morning, but had not received any replies or calls back. Upon hearing this, Max stated that something must have happened to Patrick. Alarmed by this suggestion, Jessica dropped everything she was doing and headed toward Patrick's house as quickly as she could. Upon arriving at Patrick's house, she immediately noticed his car parked in the driveway, indicating he hadn't left home. Armed with her own key, Jessica entered the yard and called out repeatedly for her fiancé, but got no response. She cautiously opened the front door, only to be confronted by a horrifying sight. Her fiancé lay motionless near the entrance, in a pool of blood. Jessica promptly called emergency services. However, paramedics who arrived on scene were unable to assist Patrick and could only declare him dead upon arrival. By the time police officers reached Patrick's residence, a heartbroken Jessica was found sobbing uncontrollably in the backyard, the very place where Patrick had proposed 2 months earlier. One of the attending officers approached her gently and began their inquiries into this tragic event. She only glanced at him and remarked that she knew who had decimated her lover and upended her entire existence. A wealthy and influential ex-boyfriend. To comprehend this perplexing case, and to decipher who might want to kill a young man, who at first glance seemed to have neither adversaries nor ill wishes, it is necessary to rewind a bit to when he and Jessica initially crossed paths. At that time, Jessica was entangled in a relationship with Gregory Bender, a prosperous businessman managing his own investment fund. Jessica encountered Gregory during her college years. He was 20 years her senior and quickly mesmerized the young woman. The businessman courted her lavishly, offering extravagant gifts and taking her to upscale resorts. Jessica believed she had discovered true love. However, soon she started noticing peculiarities in his demeanor. Gregory sought to dominate every aspect of her life, vigilantly tracking where she went and whom she associated with. Their relationship persisted for almost 8 years, during which time Gregory never introduced Jessica to his family or friends. Their interactions were strictly on his terms, meeting or going on vacations, only at his convenience. Rarely did he invite her over to his residence. Jessica craved a conventional family life and children. Each time she raised the subject, Bender dismissed the idea as untimely. When she attempted to end the relationship, Gregory proposed with a ring. Jessica accepted the proposal, but nothing changed. They still lived separately, only met when he needed. One day, Gregory was involved in an automobile accident that left him hospitalized. Upon hearing this news, Jessica hurried to see him, but first decided to stop by his house for some essential items for Gregory. There, Jessica encountered an unfamiliar woman and inquired about her identity. Instead of responding directly, the woman asked a similar question back. Jessica displayed the engagement ring on her finger and announced that she was the fiancée of the house's owner. In response, the woman laughed and exhibited her own ring, proclaiming herself as Bender's legal wife, Diora Sanchez Bender. Shattered by this revelation, Jessica resolved immediately to end all ties with the businessman who had deceived her for so many years. The boyfriend began to actively pursue Jessica, begging her to return and promising that he would divorce Dormora in the near future so they could get married. Jessica believed him once more. However, time passed and nothing about their relationship changed. Eventually, tired of the lack of progress, Jessica filled out a questionnaire on a dating site, where she soon met Patrick. After starting to communicate with Patrick, she firmly decided to break up with Gregory and informed him of her decision. Unfortunately, Gregory did not want to let her go. He became an obsessive stalker. Initially, Bender simply persuaded Jessica to come back and try again, promising once more to divorce his wife. When persuasion failed, he moved on to threats and harassment. Realizing these tactics were ineffective, Gregory decided to find out more about his rival, Patrick, about whom he knew nothing at the time. Gregory turned to professionals who hacked into Jessica's account to uncover who she was communicating with. After discovering Patrick's identity and obtaining his contact information, Gregory began sending threatening messages, demanding that Patrick break up with Jessica and referring to her as his fiancée. Patrick remained calm and unreactive to the threats, believing they would not escalate beyond verbal harassment. However, Jessica was frightened because she understood that her ex-boyfriend was capable of anything. He was a man with substantial financial resources and connections and owned a large collection of firearms. Jessica proposed breaking up with Patrick before anyone got hurt, but Patrick refused even to consider it. Consequently, they decided it was time to involve the police by providing evidence that Bender was stalking and threatening them. The couple succeeded in obtaining a restraining order against Gregory, while also requiring him to surrender all firearms stored in his home. Things calmed down for a while after this legal action. The lovers began thinking that the stalker had finally left them alone. Jessica persuaded Patrick that it was crucial to install CCTV cameras around and inside the house because she feared Gregory might violate the ban. On February 27, 2018, during the initial examination of the crime scene, criminalists immediately ruled out robbery. They noted that by the nature of the mutilation, this murder had a personal motive and that the perpetrator clearly hated his victim. The body of a 25-year-old man revealed 4 gunshot wounds, 1 in the thigh, 1 in the chest, and 2 in the head. Additionally, experts identified injuries and bruises consistent with a fall from a ladder. The body was found lying on the floor between the front door and the stairs, leading to the second floor. Investigators speculated that the killer had most likely snuck into the house and waited on the second floor. When an unsuspecting Patrick entered and climbed the stairs, he was met by his assailant. The intruder fired a bullet into Patrick's thigh, causing him to roll down the stairs. Following him down, the perpetrator fired another shot into his chest before finishing him off with 2 shots to the head. Although no murder weapon was recovered, it was determined to be a rare model of pistol that is not easy to obtain. The first shell casing was found on the second floor of the house. 2 more were found downstairs. However, a 4th shell casing was missing. Despite Jessica's statements about knowing who killed her fiancé, initial suspicion fell on Patrick's neighbor. They had a serious conflict some months prior. This neighbor was a U.S. Army veteran with combat experience who had developed a mental disorder due to severe injuries and concussions sustained during service. In December 2017, just months before, this veteran mistook his new neighbor for an intruder and opened fire, thankfully missing, but ended up hospitalized in a psychiatric facility due to an exacerbation of his condition. He was adept with firearms and could easily acquire rare gun models. This background made him a prime suspect in Patrick's murder, despite Jessica's accusations pointing elsewhere. Once he returned home, Patrick found himself constantly followed. A neighbor, who struggled with mental illness, was particularly suspicious of Patrick, calling him a spy and vowing to expose him. This neighbor's unhealthy imagination could indeed be a potential motive. Consequently, the authorities detained and interrogated him. The neighbor openly expressed his strong dislike for Patrick but maintained a solid alibi at the time of the murder. Several eyewitnesses confirmed this alibi. Because these recordings were gone, it was impossible to determine who entered or exited the residence on that day. Adding to the challenge, no physical evidence was found at the crime scene. No fingerprints, shoe prints, or DNA traces. It became clear that the murder was meticulously planned. Despite their suspicions surrounding Gregory, it appeared as though he might evade justice for now. The police decided on a covert approach and asked Jessica to engage her former lover in an earnest conversation. She agreed without hesitation. Jessica called Gregory and dramatically blamed him for all that had happened. She wept and repeatedly questioned why he did it. Yet Gregory seemed to anticipate the investigators' intentions from the outset. He pretended not to understand what she meant. When Jessica accused him directly of killing her fiancé, Gregory feigned shock and offered condolences. Attempting to provoke a confession or trick him into making a mistake proved fruitless. Lacking concrete reasons to detain or further question him, police could only summon Gregory for testimony when required by law. He complied with restraining orders and appeared to have moved on from his ex-girlfriend long ago. While detectives struggled to find leads, a breakthrough came when Dawara Sanchez Bender contacted them with crucial information about Patrick Dara's case. She was promptly invited for an interview at the station, where she revealed significant details occurring shortly before the crime transpired. She discovered a peculiar notebook concerning her husband's death in his office. Upon examining it, Diora found a detailed layout of an unfamiliar house and next to it, a peculiar series of procedural steps. Initially, she did not pay much attention to it. However, when Diora News report detailing the brutal murder of a young man and the story displayed the plan of his house, she immediately recalled the drawings she had seen by her unfaithful husband, with whom she was nearing divorce. She decided to inform the investigators. This information provided the police with sufficient grounds to search the house of the alleged perpetrator. They found the mysterious notebook that the businessman's wife had mentioned in his office. Although the pages containing the house's plan and additional records were missing, they were soon located in a trash can within the office. Gregory had apparently attempted, but forgotten, to dispose of them properly. He had merely torn out the pages, crumpled them, and discarded them in the trash bin. Apparently, he was confident that no search would be conducted on his house as there was no incriminating evidence against him. On these pieces of paper, aside from the house's layout, there was an elaborate outline of the crime itself. It became evident that the perpetrator had meticulously planned every aspect over a prolonged period. The document mentioned specific actions like disabling his phone, wearing gloves, and applying a special substance to shoe soles to avoid leaving footprints on floors. From these records, it was clear that Gregory had tracked his victim. He knew Patrick's return schedule and was aware of surveillance cameras present inside and around Patrick's home. Additionally, Gregory ensured that he disposed of all incriminating items, such as weapons used in the crime, and soiled clothes, shoes, and gloves. His downfall stemmed from his own records not being destroyed in time and his wife's curiosity. Furthermore, police discovered a fourth missing shell casing on Gregory's table inside a cigar box, evidently intended as some macabre trophy by Gregory. Forensics confirmed this casing matched those from the crime scene. The defense attorneys tried shifting blame towards Jessica during trial preparations. However, there was enough concrete evidence pointing towards Gregory for him to be arrested and brought forth for trial proceedings. The primary challenge then lay within considering all evidence collected deemed circumstantial, since neither murder weapon nor direct proof linked him physically at victim's residence, along with no witnessing testimonies, raised complexities. Ultimately, proceedings began against Bender. However, challenges remained in proving the case beyond a reasonable doubt. This was due to the circumstantial nature of the evidence. Crucial links were unbridgeable, making it difficult to reach absolute conclusiveness essential. Until May 2021, more than 3 years after he sought the best lawyers who had ample time to prepare for the case thoroughly. Despite this, the businessman remained optimistic, appearing to believe he would escape accountability. Jessica was a pivotal witness. She detailed her long-standing relationship with Gregory, describing how she discovered he was married and tried to end their involvement. She also shared instances of harassment and threats against her and Patrick. Jessica provided crucial evidence, including saved screenshots of correspondence and phone records. In response, Bender's attorneys attempted to shift all blame onto Jessica. The defense argued that Jessica herself provoked Gregory with her actions, registering on a dating site and starting a new relationship before ending things with Gregory. They claimed this behavior wounded his pride and ego. Furthermore, Jessica was accused of mercantilism, highlighting her fondness for receiving expensive gifts from a wealthy suitor. During one session, Dora Sanchez, the defendant's now ex-wife, was called as a witness. The previously indifferent defendant became animated and unexpectedly professed his love for her. Moved by this confession, Sanchez seemingly reconsidered her stance on testifying against Gregory. She got confused during her testimony, citing forgetfulness. Eventually, she mentioned that she had lived with the man for many years and doubted he was capable of murder. Defense attorneys tried to challenge the legality of the search of defendant's home. Despite his ex-wife's unexpected statement and the lack of direct evidence, the jury still found Gregory Bender guilty of first-degree murder after hours of deliberation. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When the judge read the sentence, Bender stared at Jessica intently without blinking. His glare really made her feel sick, and she almost had a panic attack. Sitting next to her late fiancé's mother, Jessica began sobbing and choking. Despite many attempts by Bender and his well-paid lawyers to appeal and get the case reviewed, all appeals were rejected. The widespread attention this case received in society played no small part in this outcome, since a wealthy millionaire businessman had cold-bloodedly murdered a simple working man and tried to get away with it. The story of Patrick Dara was widely covered in the press. As Gregory Bender remains behind bars, Jessica Devaney says she feels safe. She continues to live in Patrick's memory, wearing the ring he gave her as a gift and another piece of jewelry that he never got around to giving her. Jessica maintains a close relationship with her deceased fiancé's parents, who treat her like their own daughter. Every relationship of a person is based on the pillar of trust, whether it's between parents and children, husband and wife, or even between boyfriend and girlfriend. But if someone breaks the trust of another person in these essential relationships and starts thinking badly about them, it feels really terrible. And this case is somewhat similar, where a boy and a girl from Pakistan were very happy in their relationship. But then, after some time, the girl breaks up because she started seeing a dog's side of her boyfriend. But then, what the boy did with his girlfriend shook the entire Pakistan. Shaukat Ali Muqaddam was not only a normal citizen of Pakistan, but also a diplomat and ambassador of Pakistan. Due to this, he had to live in different countries. However, in 2021, he was living in Islamabad, Pakistan. Apart from this, at one point, Shaukat Ali had also been Pakistan's ambassador to South Korea and Kazakhstan. Because of this, he held a very high position in Pakistan. There were a total of 5 people in his family, including Shaukat Muqaddam, his wife Kausar Muqaddam, 2 daughters and 1 son. October 23, 1993 was the day when a beautiful girl was born in Shaukat Ali's house, whom they named Nur. Nur was a healthy and cute baby who always laughed and never bothered anyone too much. Although Shaukat's professional life was very busy and stressful, but when he came home, he spent quality time with his family. As a result, his children had a very good upbringing. From school days, Nur had a great interest in studying. She always used to read either school books or other books. Now, because Shaukat Muqaddam was a diplomat, he used to get transferred to other countries due to his work, which is why Nur started her schooling from Ireland. Then she completed high school from South Korea. After South Korea, the family moved to Kazakhstan. But no thinks about completing her college in the US, where her older sister Sarah also lived. However, after the US, Nur returned to Pakistan, Islamabad. As humble and smart as Nur was in her childhood, she was equally humble and smart in her adult years. That's why everyone at home trusted Nur and easily accepted her decisions. Besides, Nur loved animals, especially stray dogs and cats. She used to feed them whenever she had time. Although Noor belonged to a wealthy family, she never had a liking for materialistic things. By hearing all these things, you must have understood that Noor was a kind-hearted, down-to-earth, intelligent, and confident girl. Along with all these things, Noor also had a great passion for art and calligraphy. She often made religious paintings too. As I mentioned, coming from a wealthy diplomat family, parties were a common occurrence at the diplomats' homes. So Shaukat Makadam often took his family to such parties because they were excellent for networking and building connections. It was at one such party in 2018 that Noor met a boy named Zahir Jaffer. Zahir and Noor are both going to be key characters in this case. So before we proceed, let's take a brief look at Zahir's background. Zahir Jaffer was born in the USA, but he spent his childhood and teenage years in Pakistan. After that, Zahir pursued his graduation in the US and also spent some time living in the UK. Zahir's father was Zakir Jaffer, who was a very successful businessman. Due to his father's business ventures, the Jaffer family was one of the wealthiest families in Pakistan. The Jaffer family had various businesses including healthcare, oil, real estate, and construction. This also provided them with opportunities to work with their country's military. One of these companies is Ahmed Jaffer and Company, where Zahir Jaffer is now the CEO while his father, Zakir Jaffer, used to oversee the company. But after some time, Zahir's mood changed and he started working as a therapist at a company called Therapy Works. In this company, Zahir used to listen to the children of the school and explain to them about mental health care. He also used to arrange lectures and presentations for the children. But the shocking thing here is that Zahir himself was an introverted and angry since childhood. He also had very few friends, and he rarely attended parties with them. But it is at one such party that he meets Noor, and he likes her. And Noor also enjoys talking to Zahir. Perhaps this happened because their personalities were different, and people say that opposite personalities are attracted to each other. However, both their families already knew each other because they used to attend such parties. But friendship between Noor and Zahir developed from this party. Then, after some time, this friendship turned into love and they both entered into a romantic relationship. However, it's not like they kept this fact hidden from their parents or friends. Rather, both their families and friends knew that Zahir and Noor were dating. Both families were happy because Noor completes Zahir and Zahir completes Noor. Actually, Noor brought out a side of Zahir that no one had seen before, whereas Zahir used to be very introverted before. But as soon as he met Noor, his personality began to change gradually. He started enjoying his life, hanging out with people. And at one party, people were surprised to see Zahir dancing with Noor, including Zahir's family, because they had never thought they would see this side of Zahir's personality. Everything was going well, but as the relationship grew older, things started to deteriorate. Initially, everything was going well in the relationship. Both were enjoying themselves and their families were also very happy. But then, after some time, a different side of Zahir came out in front of Noor. Actually, Noor later finds out that Zahir is a very aggressive and abusive man. Allegedly, Zahir had physically and mentally abused Noor several times. Not only that, Zahir had also raised his hand against his own mother before. As a result, after almost 3 years of relationship, when Noor couldn't bear Zahir anymore, she broke up with him at the beginning of 2021. In both families, there was dissatisfaction over their children ending the relationship. Because neither of them was a normal family, and in such affluent households, it's not typical for a boy and a girl to enter a relationship, break up shortly after, and then enter into a relationship with someone else later. In fact, people like them also see relationships as a business. Like most wealthy families, they marry off their sons or daughters where they can profit. But besides that, Zahir was also displeased that Noor left him, and now he took it as an affront to his male ego. However, after some time, Zahir also started thinking about moving on, and then he thought he would go back to the US and settle there because he also had US citizenship along with Pakistani citizenship. Now let's jump to July 18th, 2021. On this day, Zahir booked a taxi to go to Islamabad International Airport. Actually, according to Pakistan Standard Time, Zahir's flight to New York was at 3:50 a.m. on July 19th. He had already packed his bags and informed his family about it. But before leaving, he wanted to meet Nur just once, so he called Nur on the evening of July 18th. At that time, Nur was at her home preparing for Eid with her family. Now Zahir called Nur and requested, "I am leaving this country for New York, and I will never come back here again. But I will settle in the US, so please meet me once before I leave." Additionally, Zahir told Nur, "Come to my house. We'll meet, and then when I leave for the airport from my house, I'll drop you off at your home first." Although these two had already broken up, before that they had been in a relationship for 3 years, which led Nur to say yes to meeting Zahir. After that, at 9:05 p.m., Nur leaves her house. But she doesn't tell her family that she's going to Zahir's house. She just says she's going to her friend's house and will be back soon. Around 10 p.m., Nur arrives outside Zahir's house at the scent location in Sector F74. But strange things start happening from here. Now, as I told you, Zahir's flight was at 3:50 a.m., but between 10 and 11 p.m., Zahir calls his travel agency multiple times. Zahir called his travel agency and started asking them very strange questions like, "What would happen if I don't board this flight? Will I get my refund back? If I decide to book tickets again after 10 days, what will happen?" Sometime later, Zahir called his travel agency again and said that now I'm not canceling my ticket, but I've decided to go to the US on this flight. But let me tell you, during this time, Nur was inside his house with him. But for her, this house was a new place because she had never been here before. Afterward, the taxi that Zahir had booked to go to the airport also arrives outside Jathra's house at exactly 11 p.m. However, Zahir doesn't come out of the house for half an hour. Meanwhile, the taxi driver called Zahir 2 or 3 times, but Zahir told him to wait, saying, "I'll be there in just 5 minutes. However, at 12:07 a.m., he calls the taxi driver again and says, "My plan to go to the airport is cancelled now. Anyway, if we leave for the airport now, I won't be able to catch my flight." Despite waiting for more than an hour, Zahir pays the taxi driver half the fare. Actually, Zahir had booked this taxi for 2,000 Pakistani rupees. Now after that, the taxi driver leaves from there. But at 1:40 a.m., Zahir calls the taxi driver again and asks him to come back to his house. Now the taxi driver also returns to Zahir's house because he knew he would get the full payment. But this time too, Zahir made the taxi driver wait outside the house for a few minutes. And then at 2:15 a.m., Zahir comes out with his luggage. But the strange thing this time was that Nur was also with him, and she didn't have sandals on her feet, which the driver found very strange. However, what struck him as even strange was that Zahir was talking to Nur during the car ride, but Nur wasn't responding to his words. Although the driver didn't pay much attention to this at the time, halfway through, Zahir told the driver, "Now take the car back towards home anyway. We're already very late. I don't think we'll make it to the airport on time and catch the flight." After that, the taxi driver drops them off again at Jaffar's house at 2:35 a.m. But as soon as Nur got out of the taxi, Zahir pulled her inside the house. According to the taxi driver's statement, he felt like Nur wasn't supposed to go back inside the house. According to the taxi driver Zahir, but Zahir forcefully took her inside. Then on July 19th, Nur stayed at Zahir's house the whole day, and then July 20th arrived, which was the day of Eid. Nur had come to Zahir's house to meet him on July 18th at 9:05 p.m. But now it had been more than 24 hours, and Nur's father and mother had returned home after shopping for Eid. But when they find out that their daughter has been missing from home for 24 hours at 12:57 a.m. on July 20th, Shakat McAdam texts his daughter asking her where she is. However, Nur doesn't reply to that text message. Then at 5:48 a.m., Nur's mother messages her, and 2 family friends also call Nur, yet there is no response from Nur. This causes worry for Nur's parents, and they were about to inform the police about it. But at 10:43 a.m., Nur sends a voice recording to her mother. However, the contents of that recording were never made public, but it was the last time Nur's mother, Kosar McAdam, heard her daughter's voice. But after sending the voice message, another strange thing happens. Zahir immediately calls Nur's mother from his own phone and tells her that Nur is not at his house, trying to prove that he hasn't even seen Nur. Then from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. that same day, Zahir repeatedly calls his father Zakir Jaffer. However, at around 7:10 p.m., Nur is seen on CCTV cameras. But by that time, her condition was very bad, and it seemed as though Zahir had tortured her severely. In the CCTV footage, Nur is seen jumping from the balcony of Zahir's house on the first floor and falling directly onto an iron grill. This caused her to sustain an injury to her abdomen, which is why she is seen holding her stomach in this clip. She was actually distressed by Zahir's harassment and wanted to leave the house. However, the security guard closed the gate, and meanwhile, Zahir also jumps from the balcony to catch Nur and brings her back inside. But as he was bringing her back, Nur falls down, but Zahir drags her inside. Now I should tell you that it wasn't just Zahir and Nur inside the house. There was also a security guard, a cook, and a gardener, but none of them helped Nur. In fact, from July 18th to July 20th, Nur attempted to escape from this house 6 times. But each time, one of Zahir's servants informed him, and Nur was always caught. But this time, because of Nur's attempt to escape, Zahir becomes very angry. After bringing Nur back inside, he calls his father once again around 7:30 p.m. But since then, Zahir didn't call anyone for 30 minutes because in the meantime, Zahir first attempts to shoot Nur with his handgun. But as soon as he presses the trigger, his gun jams. However, even after that, Zahir doesn't stop wanting to kill Nur. It was already in his mind. So he takes out a Swiss knife and starts stabbing every part of Nur's body. Meanwhile, Nur scratches Zahir's face and arms with her nails. But after some time, Nur's condition deteriorates so much that she faints. Nur was unconscious, but even then, Zahir kept stabbing her with the knife. Afterward, he grabs Nur by the throat and keeps squeezing until Nur's last breath is gone. Later, Nur's post-mortem report reveals that she died due to lack of oxygen. But before killing Nur, Zahir ripped her several times. But Zahir didn't stop there. After Nur's death, he pulled out his knife and started cutting Nur's throat. And finally, he severed her head from her body. After killing Nur, Zahir quickly calls his father and friends saying, "Thieves have broken into our house, and I need help." At the same time, some of Zahir's friends head towards his house. However, Zahir's father wasn't there. That's why he called the CEO of the company where Zahir worked named Therapy Works and said, "Quickly go to my house and save my son at any cost." In reality, Zahir's father, Zakir Jaffer, called the CEO of that company because they needed to erase all evidence of Nur's murder by going to Zahir. Moreover, the CEO of the company had to comply because Zahir's father was funding the company. Around 8:30 p.m., Tahir Zahur, the CEO of Therapy Works, arrives outside Zahir's house with his 6 employees. Additionally, some of Zahir's friends were also present. However, the door of Zahir's house remained closed, so Tahir took a ladder and with his employees entered through the window on the first floor. But as soon as they reached the first floor, Zahir attacked one of the employees with a knife piercing through his chin and tongue. Zahir was extremely angry at that moment, so 5 to 6 people quickly grabbed him to control him. After this, Zahir's hands were tied behind his back, and ropes were also tied around his feet. But as soon as the people went inside Zahir's room from the balcony, they were stunned. In fact, there was blood everywhere on the floor, even on the walls of the room. Then they saw Nur's body in the center of the room, but her head was 3 feet away from her body. Now, everyone inside the room was astonished to regain control over Zahir, and after seeing Nur's dead body. But in the meantime, the neighbors were also quite alert because when Zahir was being caught, he was screaming a lot, which made his neighbors call the police. After that, the police arrived there. And then on July 20th, around 10 o'clock at night, the police called Kakut Nukadarm to inform him that his daughter had been murdered. Hearing this sad news, Nukadam's family home was engulfed in mourning because their youngest and dearest daughter was no longer in this world. But Nur's family knew who had done all this, and now they wanted to punish Zahir according to Pakistan law, meaning the death penalty. After that, the police arrested Zahir, but now they were worried about how Zahir would confess his crime. But Zahir did something very strange here too. As soon as the police caught Zahir, he confessed in a short while that he was the one who had killed Nur, and he had done so because he loved Nur very much. He had even proposed marriage to Noor, but she had rejected his marriage proposal and later broke up with him. This hurt Zahir's ego, so he booked his and Noor's one-way tickets to New York for July 19th. But before this, Zahir had decided that if Noor agreed to go to New York with him, they would get married and settle in New York. But if Noor didn't agree, he would kill her. However, from July, Zahir tried to convince Noor for marriage. But when Noor refused to marry him, Zahir finally assaulted her very brutally. Although all the servants in Zahir's house knew what Zahir did with Noor, none of them tried to stop him even once, not even daring to call the police because they were afraid that if they did, Zahir would not spare them. Now, even though Zahir had confessed his crime in front of the police, when the case went to court, he was behaving strangely in court. Firstly, he entered the court looking disheveled as if he hadn't bathed for days. Besides, he shouted loudly in the courtroom, even abusing the judge. Furthermore, the police had to drag him into the court and out of the court forcefully. However, he was doing all these things to prove that he is mentally unstable. And because of this, he should be spared from the death penalty for the murder of Noor. If it were proven that Zahir is mentally unstable, then firstly, his punishment would be reduced. And secondly, he would escape the death penalty. Actually, Zahir had schizophrenia, and he wanted to take advantage of it by telling the court that he is mentally unfit. Actually, schizophrenia is a serious mental illness in which a person is mostly lost in the world of imagination and knows very little about the real world. Because of this, he often behaves strangely. But when Zahir's medical examination was done, the report clearly stated that Zahir is mentally fit, and whatever he did with Noor, he did it consciously. But this made it clear that Zahir was an abuser and an aggressive person. Besides, there were many harassment cases against Zahir in both the US and Pakistan. In this case, during the ongoing trial in court, the entire Pakistan raised its voice for justice for Noor. Rallies and marches were held every day. As a result, on February 24, 2022, Noor received justice, and Zahir was sentenced to 2 death penalties. One for physically assaulting Noor and the other for her murder. Additionally, his 2 house staff, Iftikhar and Muhammad Khan, were also sentenced to 10 years in jail. Looking at the photos, you wouldn't know much, but Zahir was a powerful, tall, and aggressive man with whom a sweet and innocent girl, Noor, spent almost 48 hours. And those 48 hours were nothing less than hell for her. So with this, the Noor Makeda murder case comes to an end right here. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.